Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Suzanne Kalanian. I'm an inner leadership coach, and you're watching my video cast on all things inner leadership, personal development, and new work. And I'm very delighted to have with me today Thomas Legrand. Bonjour, Thomas.
Bonjour, Suzanne.
As your name implies, you're joining us from France. You're a French national. Mm-hmm. And I'm really, looking forward to our conversation. You are a wisdom seeker, a social scientist, and a sustainability practitioner. And you just published your first book in January 2022 called The Politics of Being. And today, I would love to talk a little bit about this book, your project, and the path that led you to writing this book. And it's really something that resonates with me when I read, about what you're suggesting in your book and what your thesis is. And you are basically calling for a paradigm shift from the politics of having to the politics of being. And you've spent the last 10 years, you just told me, researching this book or researching for this book and reflecting on how we can basically change our society from this paradigm, from having to being. And you also claim, which is something that I also believe in, that all problems come from within us, from our minds and from our hearts. And so I want to jump right into this new paradigm of being. You say that a civilization that puts the inner development at its center is kind of what is needed. Can you expand a little bit on that? Like, what do you mean by that? And what is this new paradigm of being?
Sure, Suzanne. So yes, I think human development is about being, right? I build on this important sentence from the Earth Charter, which says in 2000, when basic needs have been met, development is about being more, not having more. We can call it being also human flourishing, self-actualizing. There's different words that we could use for that. What I mean by being is we can see it from two interrelated perspectives. One is about our truest being, becoming who we are, and the other one is our highest being, we could say, the best version of ourselves, or to develop the human qualities. So there's a long, this is very also similar to the concept of eudaimonia in Greek philosophy, that people nowadays working on happiness bring back in the discussion. So by being, I mean also importantly all beings. So it's not only about human development, but all beings have the right to be. And I mean, as many spiritual traditions recognize, being or truest being is, and mystics from all tradition have had a similar experience, which you can call unity consciousness or interbeing, where they feel somehow one with everything that is. So I believe this is our truest nature, and that is why our truest being comes naturally together with our highest being. So when we feel one with everything that is, from there can spark, all the great human qualities. It's not only an effort to develop them, but they come naturally out of our truest being, and in particular, a sense of service to the world, to nature, to one another, which is why it is so important to deal with current social and ecological crises we are facing.
I love what you said, the sense of service, because often, you know, when I talk to people about personal development and how important it is and how we need to start with ourselves, and there is this kind of almost now criticism about self-optimization, you know, that, oh, well, it's just for your own sake. But I disagree. I mean, I'm really on it with you that self-development is not only serving me, but when I work on myself and I find inner peace and balance and I'm in my full potential, it also serves the world. It serves my community. It serves my family. It serves my system. So this is really a very important part. And I think, I mean, the title of your book implies that you're not just talking about self-optimization, but you're talking about a change that will affect, it starts from within, but it affects, it's a ripple effect. It affects your system, small and large. And, you know, I really love that point. And it's often also, you mentioned basic needs being met. I mean, I think we also have to note that we are talking from a perspective of the Western world, where our basic needs are for the most time, or for the most part, met. How do you see this a little bit in the global? Do you know what I'm talking
about? Sure. Well, from one way, it's true that sociologists, for example, emphasize that, and they say we are in the Western world going through a big cultural change from survival values to self-expression values. And that's why also beings becomes much more relevant. And we see even that at some stage, for example, of economic development, happiness is does not longer really increase with increase in income. There's other dimensions that are much more important to increase happiness. And indeed, as you were saying about you know, how inner development matters for the world. Indeed, there's science that shows that how we take care of others, how we relate to nature, and of course how we relate to ourselves are very important drivers of our happiness. So it's really entering this kind of new narrative, new worldview. We can call it, some people call it the story of interbeing, a whole new story for how we understand human flourishing. And it's not people that are too much focused on themselves without, you know, the compassion, for example, to work for the benefit of others, may not be the ones most fulfilled. Regarding your point on, so there's, you know, how does this apply? Is it only apply for the high income societies? From this perspective, you could say yes, you know, when basic needs have been met. From another perspective, I'm not sure at all. And I see that even if I look, you know, in which societies right now, there are these seeds of a politics of being that is that are sprouting, and I've tried to map exhaustively, you know, the main fields where they are. So if I look, one of them is happiness. Well, this has been brought into politics by Bhutan, and it's based on their, you know, their spiritual roots, their culture, their wisdom, and you know, these are a rather low-income country. Another example, so that's one value I think the politics of being should build upon, happiness. Another one, which is I call it life, and how we should harmonize ourselves with life processes. So how does this is entering politics? When a great example is when we viewed philosophy in South America, which comes from indigenous cosmogonies. So what I feel is that the ideas I'm presenting in this book do resonate a lot with people working in lower income country. Also because maybe they are not been so much in this paradigm of modernity, economic growth, and they see to them it's much more obvious this link with traditional wisdom, which often embody this inter-being paradigm. So for them, it makes often much more sense to look at development in that perspective. So I would say it can apply differently to countries at different level of economic development, but I think it can be very relevant, and it can be resonating with people from lower income countries.
Mm-hmm. That makes absolute sense, because you do, as you just mentioned, talk about these wisdom traditions and spiritual traditions that need to be put or brought more into our lives so that we can connect and that we can, come in the state of being instead of having. And you mentioned nature and all beings, and I, couldn't agree more. I mean, it's really kind of like I feel a sense of urgency with this too, looking at, the climate crisis. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. And before we dive a little deeper, I have one more question about the process of writing your book. You said you spent almost a decade on writing it. What surprised you most about, the process and writing the book? Was there anything that you were like, I'm just curious?
Yeah, no, good question. Well, the main thing I was often repeating to my wife over and over after, getting into the data, the materials, etc., and really being able to sometimes, get to the bottom of things and clarify, what was the main idea behind. I was often telling her, I don't know why, if it's that simple, why no one has yet written this book, right? Because I'm building, as I said, on this sentence, for example, on the Earth Charter, development is about being more. Yeah. And to me, it's a very important field of work that is completely underdeveloped, and no one that I know, I've tried to figure out, what this means, being more for countries from a political level, development paradigm point of view. And to me, this seems like the most important question nowadays. If we believe that at the end, it's what we most need is this kind of shift of consciousness. If we invest in being, well, we will do this kind of cultural evolution, and we need it urgently now. But it's also, I believe, the fundamental nature of what politics should be. And you can build on Confucius, you can build on Aristotle. They all have said the purpose of the good state is to help citizens develop their virtues, right? So I'm evolving a little bit this perspective by bringing the spiritual dimension, that this virtue is not something that the society should impose on people a little bit artificially, but these virtues emanate naturally from our process of becoming who we are in a healthy society, in a healthy mind.
Yes. And that brings me to my next question, because society should help us as humans come into that state of being fully human, living our potential. And my question is, you say, and I agree, that life is a spiritual journey coming into ourselves and into our power. Then how can society and its institutions help us? Because obviously, as you said, if it's so easy and it's so clear, why hasn't or isn't it happening? So how can society and its institutions help us on this journey, on this path? That makes total sense.
Yeah, indeed, this is quite easy when you really, and that's, I think, what we need, really completely restart, our thinking, because we come with so much. The problem is that we have so much ideas, so much assumptions, so much conditioning about, what development, politics is about, etc., that we are no longer if we start, from the very basic question, then we can realign politics with its true purpose. And I think it shows, when you look at the evidence, it just shows that we are so much illiterate collectively about the inner dimension. Because when we look at the studies, there's a very strong case, and I can tell even that some of the most thriving societies are the ones that are doing better on that agenda. And they are still tapping onto a very minor potential because their vision is not that conscious about this need. But I'm thinking, for example, about Nordic countries. As I start, for example, your question, what does it entail? What societies needs to offer to its members to allow them to express their full potential? Well, it starts, I think, with early childhood. In Sweden, for example, you have 18 months, I believe, of parental leaves. In the US, there is no federal policy on parental leave. So if we know that a child to develop harmoniously so that it can become a fulfilled person later and can contribute also positively to society, and that's why also there's a very good case to invest in that. It needs to have the presence and the love of his or her parents, and talking about family leave, and we can talk about parenting programs, etc. We can talk about how the need to prevent, detect, etc., potential traumas and how to transform them early on. So that's a very simple policy agenda. Another one is changing completely the education system, which is not about filling our brains with knowledge, which nowadays no longer makes sense with artificial intelligence and how knowledge is changing so quickly, etc. But rather helping pupils, children, to become who they are and the best version of themselves. And there are a lot of all my work is based on existing examples. So I'm looking at what we can do now, what is already existing, and then we just need to scale up. And if we do that, I can tell you the next generation will be completely different. And what they could invent in terms of a politics of being would be beyond what we can imagine nowadays. So I just want to offer for the moment a very practical policy agenda in 9 sectors I develop in the book, which definitely will help us to be much more fulfilled as human beings, but also be much more wiser and compassionate to be able to deal with the crises we are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that the education system is a big place to start, and it needs to be completely revamped, in my opinion. What about businesses? So you are an economist. I find that interesting too. What role do leaders play, either now on a business level or even political? What, in my opinion, leadership is an important topic, and how do you see the role of leaders with your paradigm shift?
Sure. Well, leaders have a great role, and there can be also leaders at every scale, at every hierarchical level. But I think the basis for the kind of leadership we need is inner development and growing the kind of human, inner, spiritual qualities, whatever you call it, to be able to embody this kind of paradigmatic change and allow people around them, to do the same. Being able also to help the people around them to express this kind of quality, I think, is a very important part of leadership. And that goes especially with creating safe spaces, so that where people feel they have the trust to and be empowered to express fully themselves and to be responsible members of their organizations, and also create transformative spaces to be able to ask the real deep questions, direct our attention on the most important questions. So I think that's a very important role of leadership, how they frame the conversation. And to me also, their connection with with ourselves, our connection with ourselves, allow us to connect with the soul of their organizations, of their countries. And I develop that in the book, and using, for example, the great example of Gandhi, who said, you know, the leader of the Indian independence movement was as a small voice within, that he could hear telling him, you know, how to lead this movement. And so I think that's really this kind of learning. How do you more and more get in touch with yourselves and being able to follow this kind of inner guidance, and it can connect. You know, I think, you know, great leaders have this kind of deep connection about what is going on in the inner lives of their organization, their countries, and being able to, you know, it's a transformation process. So you probably can relate to that in your practice of coaching or in the practice of healing. Usually what you deliver is what's most at the surface. You know, it's not like, okay, I have the politics of being, I know what to do in all these sectors and we'll just implement it. No, you have to see, you know, what is coming first, what are people ready, what kind of event is opening the possibility to have a deeper debate, deeper discussion, and bring this agenda forward.
Absolutely. One of my slogans is the person you are is the leader you are. And the question I have for you now, I mean, again, I agree with you. It's also, you know, our mindset that we bring, our, you know, approach. How do we look at life? You know, do we look at life, you know, as possibilities or as, you know, problems? The question is that always comes, you know, arises for me when we talk about leadership. Looking at the leadership nowadays, I mean, are leaders ready for this? Are leaders ready to look at themselves and look themselves in the mirror? Because it's not always fun to maybe look at yourself and look at what's beneath. And we have our shadows, we have our past, maybe traumas. You mentioned that in your book, how important it is to deal with that and overcome it, or heal, I should say, traumas. Are leaders, let's say leaders who have been in leadership positions, ready for this? Or should we focus on young leaders coming, following? Are they more inclined to look at that? I think, you know, the new generations coming. What's your opinion, personal opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on, you know, different leaders, and of course this is a cultural change. So the youth is key to be able to embody this kind of change. And maybe, you know, maybe the leaders are also changing because they are more and more dealing with probably younger colleagues that are, you know, asking for something else. It's true, as you say, that it is tough for leaders who, you know, have climbed the corporate ladders, for example, and to the extent they are very successful, to ask them for humility, to ask them for a more participative leadership. But at the same time, I think it's what the, you know, and we are living in such a complex world that the kind of leadership, very hierarchical, when all the decisions are taken at the top level, I think is just no longer fit for the environment in which, for example, organizations evolve in.
Of course, we also cannot generalize leaders and leadership. I completely agree. It's just something that I feel is, if you want to bring about change, especially within yourself, you need to be willing to do that. Like it's something you have to be willing to do. This is kind of what I'm, you know, alluding to. And I think, yeah, for whatever reason, some people maybe are resistant to that because it can bring about, you know, vulnerability and maybe giving up power and, you know, not being right all the time and knowing all and being perfect. So I think it's definitely something that's coming more and more, that's asked for more and more, also because, as we saw in the last 2 years, you need to come more in a state of trust. You know, we saw it with home office. For all of a sudden, you know, you did not have your employees and staff in the office around you and couldn't control them. And it did work. So it did work. So we saw that it's possible. And also, I think the other thing, what we talked about before is mental health also in the workforce, that leaders are and managers are forced to look at that because it is a big topic that has surfaced in the past 2 years. So yes, and of course, I think we also need to understand that transition takes time and it's a step-by-step process. It doesn't just happen overnight. The more it's important, we have people like you writing about it and bringing it into the world. And so, yeah, back to you, Thomas. Sorry,
just give me a minute, Suzanne. I will close my window. There's a little bit of noise here.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Just 1 second.
Yeah, Thomas, that brings me to my next question. You mentioned that you started your own spiritual journey at the age of 23. Oh, I hear a noise now. Do you hear that too?
Yeah, I'm seeing something which is a little bit strange. I'm seeing.
Yes, so I'm very curious, Thomas, about your own spiritual journey. Please share with us what got you on this path of finding, your own spiritual, maybe also, way, and what brought you to writing this book.
Sure. So before I say, I tell you when it started, I think also it's important to recognize that I think it has just always been there. And I was just, I think, able to recognize and I recognized it right away when I was able to see a very clear path. So for me, it started when I was doing a student exchange at the end of my study in Mexico. So I got in touch with native spirituality, and it really touched me deeply, especially the relationship they had with nature, and I feel like there was to me a profound reconnection at the same time with the earth and with myself. And I remember, talking to a shaman during one ceremony, and I could see for the first time clearly a path that was offered to me. And I could recognize the same night, really, that's what I've always somehow looked for. And I decided right away to make that my priority. I was able to recognize within myself this longing that a little bit unconsciously so far I had, searched for without being conscious of it.
Yeah. So finding that connection through nature, maybe to yourself. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think there is this kind of probably a form of healing, you could say, when you reconnect to the earth.
Yeah.
And yeah, probably also, the love, I would say, that I can relate to when really being in touch deeply with the earth, and that love probably can help to heal myself. What I think was very important for me also, because I found out this path of the spiritual warrior, which as they call it or the Toltec path, as they call it in Mexico, which is a kind of archetype that is present in many cultures as a spiritual path. And that resonated also very deeply within me. And I think this kind of incentivized me to do the work, to do the healing work, this transformation work, and really be able to get in touch with this kind of motivation and this strong energy to be able to transform myself. I think otherwise, without this kind of purpose, I wouldn't have found, the kind of energy to really transform myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this purpose also was from the beginning clearly linked. I was able to perceive that, as I said in the book, all problems, they start in our minds and hearts. And I was already convinced at that time that if you want to change the world, you need also to change yourself. So that was also an important motivation. And later on, I started, let's say 10 years later, little by little, as I was working in this field of sustainability with governments, UN agency, I started to say, okay, well, we know that there is a kind of bottom-up approach where, individual approach, people transform themselves and then the world changes. But how can societies be organized in a way that embody this kind of higher consciousness and support and facilitate at the same time this cultural evolution?
Mm-hmm. So you started your journey when you were 23 in Mexico. And I know also that you've been influenced by Buddhist philosophy and spirituality, especially, I believe, Thich Nhat Hanh. You live near Plum Village as well, that I believe also was founded by Thich Nhat Hanh. Can you tell us a little bit about your, I'm sure you've met him in person. Can you talk a little bit about that influence in your life?
Sure. Just also to mention that from the beginning, what I discovered this past in Mexico, I was aware that somehow this was very universal. So I was really inspired by that path, but at the same time, I was eager to get to know more what is in other traditions, and I studied and practiced some of them. And at some point, 7-8 years ago, life brought me to a retreat here in France, where I live in Plum Village, the monastery of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. And I really was able to also recognize right away, almost, that this is where I belong somehow. And 6 months later, me and my wife moved to settle down nearby. So yeah, the influence of Thich Nhat Hanh, I think, is very important. What I appreciate a lot is one of the principle that is important in that tradition is like we are not attached to any view, any dogma, even Buddhist one, emphasize Thich Nhat Hanh. So it's also a very universal approach. I've talked about interbeing in more scientific term, we could call about, or the fact that we are relational beings. In a spiritual way, we use this term that has been first coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, interbeing. And as I said, this is a very important, this explains very why human development and collective development necessarily goes together, because we inter-are, and our well-being is not separate really from the well-being of others and the world. I was also, as I said in this book, I map the spiritual values that are the foundations of the politics of being, and they are universal. I get to hear, when I practice in Plum Village, I get to hear them about them every day from maybe a Buddhist perspective, but I think they are universal. And in the book, I have one chapter on interconnectedness or systemic complex thinking. I have a chapter on life. I mentioned, buen vivir and how life works, on happiness, on love or compassion, empathy, on peace, culture of peace, culture of partnership, etc. And Thich Nhat Hanh is very famous for applied spirituality or engaged Buddhism. So of course, this work has been very much nourished by that kind of question. How do we bring spiritual teachings, spiritual practices to transform the world in many different sectors and settings?
And Thomas, what is your own spiritual practice, if I may ask?
Sure. Well, here the path we practice is mainly mindfulness, and I would say also interbeing. So we practice sitting meditation. We practice walking meditation. This is very beautiful, trying to walk really mindfully, being completely present for our steps, and at the same time with our breathing, and being really fully in touch, fully at one, I would say, with all the things that we focus on mindfulness around us, being a tree, a flower, a butterfly. When we are very focused, we can be one with that butterfly.
Being present,
yeah, so really being present and aware in the present moment in everything we do, I think is very important practice.
Beautiful. And what is one thing you would recommend or give as to our audience now? You know, what can we do as individuals? What is one thing you would suggest, or what is this one thing we can do to bring about this state of more being than having? What is it in your opinion, or what would you give as advice?
I think an important practice, for example, is the practice of stopping. So we are often, carried away throughout our working days, going from one task to the other one, etc. But I think if we are able to stop, and you can use, I have a mindfulness bell, for example, on my computer. If you're able to stop once in a while, just to come back to yourself, to see how you feel inside, what's going on in your mind, what's going on with your emotions in your body, and just, be there and smile and just enjoy life. For example, I can stop right now. I have just a beautiful cloud in front of me. There's a blue sky, there's a beautiful cloud. And if I can just spend 1 minute now to stop and just contemplate it, and how beautiful it is, and smile to myself, and just feeling gratitude for all the good conditions that I have, that I don't need to really look for more. I think this can transform our lives and the world.
Now I know why you call yourself a wisdom keeper first, or seeker, keeper and seeker.
Seeker.
But that was almost like wisdom keeper now. Thank you so much, Thomas, for this beautiful and informative and inspiring interview. And of course, we want to know where we can get your book, The Politics of Being.
Sure, Suzanne. So my pleasure. It was great discussing with you. There is more information on the website, www.politicsofbeing.com. And there is a page on Get the Book, and you have all the links with the different platforms. It is available in many platforms already. And please, if you enjoy that reflection, please share around. I think this is an important message, and I just want to be in service of that message.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I love that last little recommendation with stopping and having little anchors like a bell or a church bell even. I think Thich Nhat Hanh writes about that in one of his books that I read, that whenever a church bell rings, and in Europe we have a lot of church bells, use that to kind of stop and, bring yourself back to the present. And just for my audience, your book is written in English, correct? The Politics of Being is written in English?
Indeed, it is.
English?
It is in English. I hope maybe next year to have a French version, a Spanish version, maybe. So we're working on it. The book comes with a foreword by Mathieu Ricard. And as you will see on the website, it is being endorsed by many thought leaders who sees it really as a game changer into bringing this conversation into the mainstream conversation on politics, development, sustainability.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and for being here, for your time, and for these inspirational words. Thank you to my listeners who've been here, and go get that book, get inspired, and stop and be present, and so we can all help to come into this paradigm of being. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Suzanne.